First of all, I'd like to recognize that I'm coming to you live here from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional territory of the Cree, the Dene, the Saulteaux, the Nakota Sioux, and the Blackfoot peoples, as well as one of the great homelands, the Métis Nation. And so here we are at a key moment for cities in our country, right in the middle of a second wave of COVID-19, right between an encouraging throne speech and an upcoming fall economic statement. And federal partnership so far to get through this pandemic has been vital for our cities. It's been all about working together to keep Canadians safe, securing emergency funding to protect services, key services on their front lines, including and especially keeping people moving with public transit. And most recently, it's helped launch the Rapid Housing Initiative for vulnerable Canadians, which the mayors are thrilled with and very grateful to the federal government for that leadership. But we are looking to the fall economic statement to build on this and to support continued pandemic response and to begin to prepare for a green and inclusive economic recovery. And so we're very pleased to welcome key ministers to the mayor's table this week. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland, who we spoke to this morning, Minister Hussen, who we talked about housing with just now, and then shortly after this we're going to meet with Minister LeBlanc, and then later in the week Minister McKenna and Minister Wilkinson. So these have been good conversations. They continue a lot of existing threads that we've been laboring to partner with the federal government on for some time. But I'm here to speak so far to some of the key themes and priorities that we share with the federal government. Now, first and foremost here is around the inclusive economy that we want to continue to build. The pandemic has laid bare the deep inequalities that persist in this country. The impacts of this virus and the economic disruption it's caused have been disproportionately felt by lower income residents and those experiencing mental illness and other systemic barriers like racism to inclusion in community life, and also then felt disproportionately by Indigenous, Black, and other racialized people in our community. And so we want Canada's recovery to be an inclusive recovery. And we can start right now by aggressively tackling homelessness in this country. You've heard us describe tent encampments, how leasing motels could help alleviate the challenge in the short term. And the new Rapid Housing Initiative is a direct response. And the government and Minister Hussen credited the mayors and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for calling forth this important action. And we in turn thank the federal government for the investment and to secure at least 3,000 new permanent supportive and affordable housing units for vulnerable Canadians. It's a model that we believe can scale up for the other 25,000 or so Canadians still experiencing chronic homelessness or on the edge of it because of a lack of affordable housing in communities, particularly big cities across the country. We're also speaking to ministers about the additional steps to expand affordable housing supply faster, both to stop the flow of new people into homelessness and because it's one of the best steps we can take to continue to reduce inequality in our cities and in our country. Now, the other key priority that we have that's a running theme in all these discussions is a green recovery. Now, Canadians want a country that's more resilient to the next threat, whatever that is. And with leaders who tackle challenges proactively, like climate change, we want to get things done together. Now, we also see real economic opportunities for cities rooted in that green recovery, focusing especially on cities. And that means continuing to invest in public transit, essential to continuing to give people options to car dependency while we reach towards net zero emissions for all of us and all of our communities by 2050. Also scaling up local green innovation, new technologies, advanced in green buildings, district energy systems, renewables. There's so much opportunity for Canadian innovation and jobs. And so whether it's zero emission vehicles, which Canadian manufacturers are producing, or whether it's investing in nature through the tree planting programs and other nature-based solutions to deal with climate change, cities and local governments across this country are key partners in achieving those shared goals. And so we look forward to conversations with Ministers Wilkinson and McKenna on the topics of the green part of the green inclusive economic recovery here. Now, finally, the continuing conversation about operating support, last but definitely not least, the continuation of the Safe Restart Agreement. The Safe Restart Agreement that we have secured after much work this summer is helping to protect Canadians and protect the frontline services that each of us relies on every day. That first tranche of operating funding is filling a deep hole that we experienced this year, caused by the outdated fiscal tools and over-reliance on property taxation that municipalities have long flagged as our risk to our resilience and a risk to our success. And so the pandemic impacts, of course, will stretch out through 2021, and we are starting real conversations about what safe restart and operating support will look like next year. It will be essential to keep services going, but also to ensure that cities are stable and ready to help as partners drive a green and inclusive recovery. In other words, support everything we're talking about this week. And as mayors go into budget season across this country, we are looking at those challenges, and we'll have more to say about the scale of the operating challenges municipalities of all sizes, particularly our big cities where transit systems continue to struggle, are facing. But really the emphasis today is on the continued partnership to achieve those goals of a green and inclusive recovery. Et maintenant, j'invite mon ami, la mairesse Plante, pour parler à propos de ces choses en français.
Thank you so much, Mayor Iveson. Merci, Don. Et je tiens vraiment à dire que c'est un moment important pour le caucus des maires et des mairesses des grandes villes canadiennes de la Fédération canadienne des municipalités de se rencontrer aujourd'hui et également jeudi de cette semaine, puisque nous sommes à une période charnière entre le discours du trône qui a déjà été prononcé et maintenant cette mise à jour économique qui devrait être présentée par le gouvernement canadien dans quelques semaines. Pour continuer sur les bons mots de mon collègue, le maire Iveson, le moment pour se rencontrer, il est important pour, entre autres, pouvoir discuter de l'accord sur la relance sécuritaire qui a été mise de l'avant par le gouvernement canadien après que nous ayons à plusieurs reprises eu des échanges avec les différents ministres, avec les différents cabinets pour demander de l'aide pour les municipalités. Et voilà, cette aide, nous en avons reçu et nous en sommes très, très satisfaits. Ça va définitivement venir aider les villes à être plus fortes et résilientes, surtout quand il y a des questions budgétaires et où les municipalités sont assez limitées en termes d'outils fiscaux. Cette semaine, nous allons rencontrer plusieurs ministres pour avoir des conversations en profondeur. Ce matin déjà, nous avons eu la chance de discuter avec la ministre Freeland ainsi que le ministre Hussein. Et plus tard, c'est cet après-midi avec le ministre Leblanc. Et enfin, ce jeudi, avec la ministre McKenna et le ministre Wilkinson. Alors, c'est ce qui va nous permettre, bien sûr, de mettre de l'avant les préoccupations des villes canadiennes, entre autres en lien avec la COVID. On le sait, les villes sont sur la première ligne. Lorsque nos populations souffrent, lorsque nos populations ont de la difficulté à se nourrir, se loger, avoir un travail, ça a un impact direct sur nos populations dans nos villes. Et on sait que la COVID a eu un impact encore plus difficile, encore plus dur pour les communautés plus vulnérables. Au Canada, on pense aux personnes racisées, aux communautés autochtones, on peut parler aussi des femmes, ainsi que des communautés itinérantes. Et c'est dans cet esprit-là que le plan de la relance sécuritaire vient nous aider, mais je dois le mentionner, le programme de création rapide de logements qui a été proposé par le ministre Hussein est une bouffée d'air frais, puisqu'il faut trouver des solutions rapides dès maintenant pour pouvoir loger les personnes qui se retrouvent à la rue à cause de la précarité qu'a provoqué la COVID. Alors, les sujets dont nous parlerons, nous avons déjà parlé et nous continuerons à parler, sont bien sûr les enjeux liés à l'habitation et comment trouver des solutions, et finalement, la relance verte et inclusive. Et bien sûr, on a bien hâte de parler avec le ministre Wilkinson et la ministre McKenna à ce sujet, puisque on a une occasion en or ici au pays de saisir justement cette situation difficile et d'en faire un plan de relance véritablement vert, avec des idées progressistes, que ce soit au niveau des parcs, des arbres, des transports collectifs, ne l'oublions pas, et de sécuriser et de faire des infrastructures vertes. Alors, je termine en disant que les maires et mairesses aujourd'hui présents ainsi que jeudi en profiteront pour poser des questions importantes, pouvoir se positionner sur des enjeux et vraiment partager notre expérience de comment véritablement aider les citoyens et les citoyennes à passer au travers cette pandémie qui est très difficile, mais ensemble, on peut y arriver. Et je remercie mes collègues pour leur travail et leur rapport. Merci.
Merci, Madame Plante. Thank you, Mr. Iveson. Reporters will now be able to ask questions. Thank you for posting your questions in the group chat, and we will start by giving the first question. Monsieur Blouin, Louis Blouin de Radio-Canada, à vous la première question.
Bonjour. My first question is to Mayor Iveson. There's been a strong message from the Prime Minister earlier directed to city mayors and premiers. He said, act to protect public health. It's not a time to give rewards to businesses or favors to businesses right now. He's clearly not satisfied with the restrictions that some provinces and cities have put forward. How do you react to that? And do you feel that you are being lectured in a way? I'd like to get your reaction on that.
Well, first of all, I'd say that what I've heard from businesses in Edmonton is a huge appreciation for the federal government's measures to support their workers with wage subsidy, the previous and new rent subsidy program, to make sure that that businesses that might have to shut down or did shut down earlier were taken care of and will be able to be there for the long term after the pandemic. And so there's a lot of gratitude on Main Street for the federal government's interventions to support business and vulnerable people. And I think that that gives a measure of confidence that should additional measures be required on the advice of the medical health officers, which in our case are provincial and regional, not municipal. It varies across the country. And so the situation is different in each province and different jurisdictionally even in each city region. And so it's hard to have a unified answer to that. And I can't answer on behalf of the mayors because we haven't discussed that. But I think we did compare notes on the rising cases, and I think generally the mayors have supported stronger measures coming in from the orders of government, having the right jurisdiction, working from the right data, and knowing that the federal government, and in many cases cities too, have put measures in place to support the resiliency of business should stronger measures need to come into place. So I think we look to partner with all orders of government to meet the needs of Canadians to get through this pandemic and to ensure the resiliency of our economy. And I would just as soon have the medical officers of health make that call rather than these calls becoming political. But clearly, you know, if additional action is required, mounting public pressure will lead to political action too. And I think that's what we're hearing across the country. But ideally, in a situation like Edmonton's, where I'm 1 million out of 1.4 million people in a borderless region with a borderless virus, it's very difficult for any one city to act on its own. These measures really do need to be coordinated at the very least at the metropolitan scale to be effective and to be fair to business and to get the virus back in check. So that's why we'll continue to look for those zone officers of medical health to make evidence-based decisions. That's how the system should work.
J'aimerais peut-être lancer un suivi à Madame Plante, si c'est possible, là-dessus. Et je parle peut-être davantage à la mairesse de Montréal là-dessus. J'aimerais avoir votre réaction aussi au propos du premier ministre plus tôt. Il dit, l'aide est là. Il n'y a aucune raison de ne pas mettre les restrictions nécessaires en place. Êtes-vous d'accord que l'aide fédérale est suffisante? Comment vous réagissez à ces propos?
Oui, merci beaucoup pour votre question. Ben, vous savez, au Québec, présentement, le gouvernement du Québec et la santé publique du Québec ont décidé de garder les mesures en place, là, les mesures en lien avec la zone rouge jusqu'au 23 novembre. Alors, pour moi, ça, c'est les bonnes décisions qui sont prises parce que bien qu'on souhaite réouvrir certains secteurs, dont des secteurs économiques, je pense qu'il est important, il faut que la santé publique prime d'abord et avant tout. Pour ce qui est des décisions du gouvernement fédéral, comme le disait mon collègue, les villes, et là, je parle de Montréal, mais je pourrais aussi parler pour pas mal l'ensemble des maires qui sont réunis, on considère que le gouvernement du Canada a joué un rôle de leadership important en soutenant les travailleurs, en soutenant vraiment différents secteurs. Il en reste à couvrir, je vous cacherai pas. Je pourrais vous donner des exemples, entre autres l'aéronautique qui, pour le Québec, est définitivement je dirais pas un angle mort, mais c'est quelque chose qu'il va falloir trouver des solutions assez rapidement. Je pense aussi au centre-ville, et ça, c'est une demande que toutes les villes, les grands centres urbains du Canada demandent, à avoir un focus, que les centres-villes soient perçus comme des secteurs économiques. Mais à ce moment-ci, je pense qu'on doit mettre toutes les chances de notre côté pour éviter que cette deuxième vague s'amplifie et soit qu'on perde le contrôle.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you. The floor is now for Mr. Alex Boutier from the Toronto Star. Mr. Boutier.
Hi, thanks for taking questions today. Mayor Iveson, it was very clear from the Prime Minister's press conference today that he is not on the same page with some premiers and how they're managing the surge in cases. That's true in your province. It's true here in Ontario. I'm wondering if you've had any discussions amongst the mayors of big cities about concerns that your provincial colleagues are not doing enough to, clamp down on these cases.
Well, thanks for the question, Alex. Our conversation this morning was really focused on economic recovery, and so we did not have an opportunity as mayors to compare notes. Certainly, though, I think, many of us are in touch with each other individually. The mayor of Winnipeg and I have discussed the situation there, which is tragic and concerning. And all across the country, it does seem as if we are experiencing a second wave. And so we have many of the same concerns and many of the same desire for action. But for the most part, those decisions, with the exception of some places that have their own medical officers of health, for the most part, those decisions are made at the provincial level. And mayors may have opinions on this like every other Canadian, but I think where we're quite consistent is that we're strongest where the decisions are being made by the professionals and provided they're being deferred to. And so, at the Edmonton level, we've had very, very good constant contact with Dr. Sikora, who's the medical officer of health for the Edmonton region. And again, this has to be, further to what I was saying previously, a regional effort for a borderless virus, and regular contact with Dr. Hinshaw, Alberta's medical officer of health as well. And the city stands ready to work to support business and vulnerable people and adjust our own operations. Where we have control over recreation centers and public buildings, we're enacting restrictions ahead of what is required because we believe in terms of what we can control for our own employee safety and public safety, that stronger measures are required. But at the end of the day, for them to be effective, they have to be implemented where the jurisdiction has the most impact, which is under provincial public health legislation.
Right. As a follow-up, if you've got concerns and you're imposing more restrictions where you can, the federal government has concerns. They're calling for more restrictions at a provincial level, and the province saying we want to trust our citizens to do the right thing despite record high case levels every day. I mean, how does that impasse get resolved? I mean, if the province is getting pressure from the feds and the municipalities for more restrictions, and they're not refusing it, they're not doing it, should the feds step in?
Well, the federal government does have some extraordinary authorities under legislation, I understand. I would hope it doesn't come to that because I think the context is different province by province, just as it's even different region by region within a complex province. And so I think that these things are best dealt with at the metropolitan scale. And that's where the provinces that take that approach, which seems to be what's happening in Ontario, for example, that's the right scale. Leaving it either either up to the club of the federal government or the, as always, one hand tied behind our backs, jurisdictionally limited local government is not going to get the best results. There's a reason why health is delegated to provinces under Section 92. It's the right scale to make these decisions, and I think the mayors would encourage the provinces to follow the evidence and enact the measures to protect business for the long term and human beings and life in the short term.
Thank you very much. And the next question will come from Carly Robinson from City News. Ms. Robinson.
Hi, thank you. My first question is for Mayor Iveson, and this is a bit with the Mayor of Edmonton hat on. When talking about restrictions from a municipal level, I'm wondering when we're going to go back to I'm wondering why it's not the same as when it came to masking. We saw Edmonton was the first to bring in masking for the region, and our neighboring regions followed. I'm wondering if that's something on the table for the coming weeks and months if we're not seeing something from the province.
Well, masking was also something that we felt would have been most effective implemented by the province using their powers, at least at the metropolitan scale, again, in a borderless regional context. But ultimately, we felt the need to act to try to reduce the impact of the second wave. The evidence indicates, though some people speculate that masks are why we have a second wave, but that has been clearly debunked by the medical officers of health, who have been grateful to the city and said that our leadership position on masks is helping this from being worse, helping keep business open, helping keep case counts down. And so the question of the renewal of the mask bylaw will come before committee this Friday and before council ideally next week. And the recommendation, which I support, is to continue the mask mandate into the next year. That's a situation where the city could take unilateral action on that, but again, regrets that we had to do that rather than have it imposed consistently at the metropolitan scale by the medical officers of health for the region. So that was an exception. In terms of other measures that we might implement, we would have to potentially go back into a state of local emergency, and even powers that we have there are now subject to limitations and the ability of the province to countermand or rescind our orders. So our toolkit is quite limited. And again, if we were to shut business down or a portion of business down in Edmonton and drive demand out into the region, leading to outbreaks in the bedroom communities, then I think that we've only made the problem worse. So that's why this needs to be coordinated, again, by the order of government, having the strongest tools in the toolkit and the mandate and the resources and better evidence and data, access to the epidemiological data themselves than the city. I stand by the mask mandate. I think it was the right thing to do, and that's why we'll renew it. And if there are other things that we can do within our jurisdiction, we'll certainly look at that, like, for example, limiting access to recreation facilities, going back to virtual meetings at City Hall, leading by example within areas of our direct control.
Thank you. My follow-up is for Mayor Plante. You answered quite well in French, but I was just hoping we could get it in English for TV. Your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments today about municipalities and about the role between municipalities and provinces.
Yes, of course. Well, here in Quebec, we've been considered a red zone pretty much throughout the entire province. So what we're getting as guidelines from the government of Quebec, but also the public health authorities, is that everything, all the measures will be kept until November 23rd. And from there, we shall see. This is what has been said. I hear my colleague from Edmonton, and it's a very different situation here in Quebec. Most of our facilities are closed, restaurants and bars, and even the city council is something we do, through Zoom, for example. And as for the comment of the Prime Minister regarding what kind of measures should be put forward, I think that one of the things that mayors across the board have been asking the government, the federal government, is to take leadership in offering help financial support in different activities, sectors. And so far, it's been very, very helpful keeping our businesses alive during the first wave and even now in the second wave that we're facing here in Quebec. That being said, there are a few areas that needs to be covered. I can, as Mayor of Montreal, I'm doing a lot of representation regarding the aerospatial, no, I'm sorry. I was trying to do this right, but it didn't work out. Aerospatial, and also how we can consider a downtown area in big metropolis like Vancouver, Toronto, Edmonton, Montreal as a specific sector to give some help, because we know that with no students and no workers in the different towers, it's difficult. So I think right now we have a good balance, but we will see how the second wave evolves, and probably the financial support from both our federal but also provincial governments will be useful.
Thank you very much. Next question, prochaine question from Jessica Robb, Global Edmonton.
Morning, everyone. My first question is for Mayor Don Iveson. I'm just wondering for if there's an update for Camp Pekawaywen. From our understanding, city officials arrived this morning to clean it up, but there are still people there. I'm just wondering, will that be done today? Is there any talks of leaving it?
Oh, thanks for the question. I'm afraid I don't have the latest on that, Jessica. I know that, but what council heard last week was that there was agreement for the camp to be disbanded over the weekend, and so the organizers had agreed to do that and work to get folks moved up to the convention center, and we were interested in doing that as quickly as possible so that the limited space for 300 people, which is still quite a few, would be available to folks from the camp. Folks who lingered may have had to look at some of the other shelter operations, and there's still capacity in the city beyond what the city's opened up at the convention center. So we've also continued to bring bridge housing units online so we can graduate people out of the convention center, open up more space there to bring other people in from any remaining encampments. But the city had an understanding from the camp organizers that the camp would close, and so it is disappointing that anyone is still there. The site does need to be cleaned up. There are legitimate safety issues, and it's simply not suitable or appropriate for people to be camping there at any time, but certainly under these freezing conditions that we're experiencing. So we'll continue to provide support for people to access some of the other shelter space and continue to try to turn people through the convention center to open up more space there in the lower barrier facility for people who may not be able to access or not welcome for whatever reason at some of the other shelters. And so, but closure of the camp, the time has come, and organizers have committed to that. So I'm hopeful that they will assist in the peaceful closure of the camp at this time and its cleanup.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do have a follow-up. Thank you. I do want to pivot to COVID-19 in Edmonton, and I'm just wondering if another local state of emergency, if triggering that is on the table, or what would cause Edmonton to go into another local state of emergency just because our cases are the highest that they've ever been.
So state of local emergency is a very blunt instrument. It made sense in the spring when we needed to be very nimble for a crisis whose magnitude we didn't understand. We have much better data now, and sadly, though, some of our tools are weaker. The province made rule changes that mean that we can pass an order under state of local emergency provisions, and the province can countermand that order. And again, the more fundamental point is that for any of these measures to work, they need to apply in St. Albert and Sherwood Park and Beaumont and the counties as well to actually knock the virus back down, because so many people in our region live borderless lives. So state of local emergency is a very, very blunt instrument that's really not designed to to work for pandemics, really. It's for more of natural disasters. The strongest and most appropriate tools are under public health legislation that are in the province's toolkit and can be applied as the existing restrictions and new restrictions, the more recent 15-person gathering limits, for example, which I believe should be lower, but those are put in place with the strength of provincial orders at the metropolitan Edmonton zone region-wide scale, and that's the best toolkit. So state of local emergency would be a last resort, and we are some ways off from being at the last resort.
Thank you. And the next question will be from, prochaine question sera de Jordan Press from the Canadian Press.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor. I am curious about the amount of money that you are asking for, only because Catherine McKenna, the infrastructure minister, was just doing a chat with the Canadian Club Toronto a little earlier, and she talked about how she was reading up on FDR's New Deal as some inspiration for herself. And obviously that would be no paltry sum of money if that's what the federal government is looking at as far as recovery funding. So I'm curious about how much you have asked as far as for housing and for homelessness, how much you have asked for, and how much you're sensing the government is willing to put into it given the fiscal constraints that they already have.
Thanks for the question, and we'll be in a better position to put a dollar figure on the operating challenges that cities face as our budget work continues. It's similar orders of magnitude to what we were talking about in the spring for 2021, but we don't have a hard ask on that yet because all of us are working to reduce expenditures wherever we can to try to minimize our ask of our taxpayers and minimize our ask of federal taxpayers and provincial taxpayers for support for cities and local governments. So we have some more work to do, sharpening our pencils to manage our own costs as assiduously as we can before we finalize an ask to the federal government. But that will be coming. On housing, now that the level of ambition is to end chronic homelessness, we're looking at what that would take and doing some modeling for that as well. It is a large number to secure the units, but as part of an economic recovery that includes stimulus and investment just in and of itself, this is a really, really good candidate with really good returns on investment in terms of actually avoiding and reducing health and justice costs for provinces who are also looking for more money for their operating challenges, and also improving conditions for business dealing with some of the social disorder issues that are a concern for Main Street and on top of everything else business is concerned about. So we can quell anxieties, create jobs, and inject confidence in the economy and reduce demand on our healthcare system when we need to for its long-term sustainability and so it can respond where it needs to in the pandemic. So we'll continue to articulate that return on investment as we refine the what the upfront costs will be to acquire those units to achieve ending chronic homelessness. But that can be certainly part of the inclusive and green recovery, and then many good conversations with Minister McKenna about opportunities to achieve shared, ambitious, and perhaps in light of the results of the U.S. election, accelerating ambition on GHG reductions while creating jobs with energy retrofit, zero-emission vehicles, active transportation investments at the micro scale where we've seen people so want to be outside and discovered the joy of walking and biking in our cities through the pandemic, and then continued investment in public transit, which our country will need as it gets back to work in a greener and more inclusive way once the pandemic is behind us. And then again, we're gonna need to keep public transit whole through this time too, so the quality of service doesn't erode as a result of the pandemic, precisely when we're gonna need it to get people back to work and achieve our climate goals in the inclusive and green recovery we're working with the government on.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Jordan?
Well, I didn't know if Madame Plante, if you wanted to add anything in English or en français.
Vous êtes sur mute, Madame Plante.
Oui, désolée. Non, en fait, je trouve que Dan a fait vraiment un portrait très global de où on en est et qu'à ce moment-ci, il est trop tôt pour pouvoir parler des demandes économiques, des demandes financières. Mais c'est clair que je sais pas pour toutes les autres villes, mais moi on peut vous dire qu'au niveau de la ville de Montréal, on va présenter très prochainement un plan de relance économique vert et inclusif qu'on souhaite bien sûr présenter au gouvernement provincial et fédéral et de là l'importance d'entendre parler du gouvernement canadien de ce souhait d'avoir une relance verte. Pour nous, c'est très, très positif. Ça veut dire on va avoir des idées autant dans le transport collectif, mais bien sûr dans tout ce qui touche la transition écologique, entre autres via les espaces verts, le transport actif et tout le reste. Donc, je pense qu'on est définitivement sur la même longueur d'onde que le gouvernement fédéral quand c'est des questions de la relance économique et c'est tant mieux. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Mayoress Plante. Thank you, Mayor Iveson. Since there are no more questions, this is what concludes today's press conference. Thank you for attending. Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui et merci beaucoup d'avoir été là. Bonne fin de journée.